So here we go. We're going to start with the total gut. Okay.
All right.
A little bit about the background in microbiome labs. It was started by Tom Bain and Kieran Krishnan. So Kieran is a microbiologist. Tom Bain is a chiropractor. Tom was living in Belgium, and he and his wife had a nutraceutical company, and their father-in-law, and they sold it to Metagenics. So they've been and that was back, I think, down in the 80s. So they've been in the nutraceutical world for a while. Kieran was contracted to do clinical trials for other nutraceutical companies, and he had an expertise in vitamin K2, and he was also contracted to find the best probiotic on the planet. So once he did, that particular company that contracted him to do that was purchased by someone else, and they didn't do anything with his recommendation. So he bought the rights to develop from that recommendation, from the research that he had done, and that was the genesis of microbiome labs.
Is he the one you see on YouTube talking all the time?
Yes.
He's from Thailand?
He's from India, yeah, but he graduated out of Iowa. And as you can see from all of his YouTube videos, he's got quite a fan club. He's one of the most requested speakers on the microbiome. So he really is out there educating the world about the science. The microbiome project really showed the world that a lot of what we thought we knew about probiotics is wrong. So for the last 6 years, he's been kind of the front runner of teaching people what is really going on. And there's a certain company in Belgium that does testing on probiotics that is the top of the line. So if you're going to take a probiotic, if you're going to understand probiotics, it's really good to understand what a SHINE study is. And we'll go into that as well. Again, that's the top of the line way to test probiotics, because it's a synthetic gut that you can see every section of the gut, and there you know how it performs. You basically feed this synthetic gastrointestinal tract a probiotic, and you can see that most of them die at the point of the stomach, where spores continue on and actually colonize in the intestinal tract. So that makes all the difference. And that's really what put them on the map because of those studies. And you can see they've got their headquarters in Florida. Tom and Kieran live in Chicago. We ship out of Arizona. You know, so I guess in one way that if a tornado hit any one particular spot, the other parts would be okay. It's the whole company's not just in one state. So weather issues can't affect everything. Maybe that's a good strategy.
The St. Augustine too.
Mm-hmm.
That's our favorite place to make this.
Yeah.
You've been there.
Yes.
It's really nice.
So here we've got a healthy gut, and it's side by side with a leaky gut. The technical term for leaky gut is metabolic endotoxemia, which is really self-poisoning. You know, our bodies produce an endotoxin that causes a metabolic septicemia, but it's our microbiome that keeps it all in check. So we never really get sick from it. It's happening all the time. They shut it down, things move on. But if your gut is damaged, then it doesn't get shut down and bad things can happen. So the research has shown that there are 3 major areas that have to be held intact in order to have a healthy gut. The first is mucin 1 layer, which is like a swimming pool of a diverse population of bacteria. And the more diverse, the better. So that leads us to, how do you keep a diverse population of bacteria? You eat a wide, diverse diet. So you want to purposely look for new and different foods, because that all requires and feeds a different type of bacteria. So the end result of a healthy gut is going to be being able to eat a wide variety of food, healing your gut so that you don't react to things. If you continually keep testing and do food testing, and there's all variety of ways to do it from different technologies, but if you have a leaky gut, every time you test, you will have new and more immunoreactions. More and more foods will become reactive. That's the sign of this continuous leaking without healing. So that's what we want to heal the gut. So that's the first step, is having a diverse population in mucin 1. The second is to really feed your keystone strains. And this really goes back to developmental microbiome. How do you get your microbiome? What is the best way to nurture a microbiome? Our first inoculation comes from our mother. So in a perfect world, we will be born vaginally so that we have all of that good microbiome inoculation. We will be breastfed. We'll have another whole set of inoculation. We will not be given any vaccines or antibiotics or any of these other things on our first day of life, like so many infants are. And we will, be breastfed to a long enough point. It's 6 weeks when the immune system is fully intact. It's 2.5 years before your microbiome or your gut immune system is intact. So it's important to, in a perfect world, to be breastfed for that full 2.5 years, because that is the perfect diet for an infant, and not to have all of those environmental factors messing things up. So those keystone strains, we've identified there's 3 primary ones: Akkermansia, Faecalibacterium, and Bifidobacteria. And the more you have of those gut bacteria, the healthier you will be. They correlate with all of the best health statistics, and then inversely correlate with all the worst ones. And the way to get those are all anaerobes, meaning they cannot have air. All of the probiotics are grown in air. They're in big vats, except for spores, which are in their own little endospore, which they're protected from air. So, it's important to know that these spores help those keystone strains grow. So they get down into the gut, they colonize, and they produce vitamins and fatty acids and antioxidants that selectively feed good guys, and they produce antibiotics, custom-made ones, that selectively put down the pathogens. So they have a hierarchical intelligence. They are like generals among infantry, or a principal among elementary school kids. So they have a higher intelligence when it comes to organisms, and so they go in and they kind of, like the marshal or the governor, puts everything in order. And that's how they help the keystone strains. But we also have some specific food that we can feed those as well. And we'll talk about that. And then the last step is maintaining this pretty blue layer, which is called mucin 2. It's a thick gelatinous coating that lines our gut layer, which protects this very important epithelial cell layer. And this is where you hear about tight junctions. This is what needs to be tight so that things don't get through that barrier. And you can see this little brush border here. This is where all the absorption of nutrients take place. And under this layer here is the immune system. So this is what you don't want anything getting into this part. And so these guys are just patrolling around here looking for toxins or a breach, and there isn't any. So there's no inflammation. So this, again, this is what you would like to have. Unfortunately, this is the reality of what most people are suffering with here. There's an endotoxin, and it's over here too, called lipopolysaccharide. It is actually a component of normal bacteria that we have, called gram-negative bacteria, and it's part of their cell wall. And even when we eat, a little of this lipopolysaccharide is released, but in this nice cushion, it's absorbed and it's taken care of by the immune system, IgA, and it never harms anything. But in a situation like this, where the lipopolysaccharide, because there's an overgrowth of gram-negative bacteria, there's more than what the system can deal with. There's not enough IgA to neutralize it, to shut it down. So it starts cutting into, degrading, eating this mucin layer, and it causes a breach. And that's where it destroys the tight junctions and the epithelial cells. And you can see this release, like the floodgates are open, and the lipopolysaccharide is now getting into the lumen, working goes systemic into our body. And it's also letting a lot of the other bugs, which are now going to be pathogenic because they're not supposed to be there. And it's also going to let food particles in here. And this is where autoimmune disease, allergies, food sensitivities, all of this is happening because of this breach. And the immune cells, they do the best they can to attack it, and then they start releasing the cytokines, and we get this cascade of inflammatory action, and that's what we have, inflammation. That's what at this point would be gut on fire. This is that low level constant inflammation is the root of all chronic illness, because inflammation gets in the way of our receptors, our body's ability to make hormones, to make neurotransmitters, and to repair itself. So this is every illness you can think of, from diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disease. It all comes down to this point right here: inflammation and the breach of this lipopolysaccharide. And we'll see from the white papers, we can trace this lipopolysaccharide back to depression, to all sorts of even mental illnesses, because from this point, it's in the circulation, it can go straight up the vagus nerve and to the brain. So this is why we have to get a handle on, stopping this point of action. So the answer that we've come up with is the total gut restoration. And it takes into account those three important steps, putting them back in place and restoring the integrity of the gut. So the first step is using the spores. And we talked about that quorum sensing. That's that, the fact that they can be like generals, they have a higher intelligence. Even when they're in the spore state, they send out a chemical surveillance system, so they know what's in their environment. They know what's around them. So they know when they get, through the GI tract, what we call the acid barriers, they get past the stomach acid, past the pancreatic enzymes, past the bile salts, and they know when they're at the perfect location for them to colonize. They also know if there are pathogens in the area, and they even know what species. So when they come out of this shell, this spore, they're locked and loaded with a customized antibiotic for a specific pathogen. So that's how smart they are. So we've realized when we're training practitioners that we tell them always start with megaspore. Let the spores figure out what's going on and do what they can as far as they can go, instead of us trying to outguess them, trying to come up with our own killing agents or our own recipes or our own strategy, because it'll never be as good as them at the action, the point of action, and knowing what they know, because they've been doing this since the dawn of man. They help train our immune system. We know that infants that have not been exposed to spores have immunodeficiencies. The way we originally got these spores was from planting and eating out of a garden. They would come in with our food and our fruits and our vegetables. So since the dawn of man, they've been in this cycle. They would come through, they would colonize, they'd go back out through the feces, end up back in the soil, and animals and humans have been ingesting them. What's happened in our modern day is we've stopped that cycle. We don't get the exposure to these spores. We are sterilizing everything, and killing everything with antibiotics. With glyphosate is actually an antibiotic in the soil. It's a herbicide. So we're sterilizing the microbiome of the soil, and through our water systems and through our modern medicine, we're sterilizing our gut as well from these good spores. So what the company has done is really just put back what used to be there. And it's been done in other countries for 60 years. Each one of the species in this formula is a pharmaceutical drug in Southeast Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world, but not in America, which begs the question, why? They're so effective. So that just tells you we've got a long history of them. We know everything about them. The strains that we use are all in a Spore library in London. It's called Holloman's University. That's why when you see the species, you'll see HU, that stands for Holloman University. You'll see different species names or numbers after that. But that also tells you we know the entire genomic structure. And that's important to know because other probiotic companies don't know the entire genomic structure of their species. And bacteria share DNA with each other. And so you want to know what you're sharing with your microbiome because you don't want to be sharing things like antibiotic resistance or, genetically modified things. And you again, kind of back to, you want to know what genetics you're sharing with your microbiome. That also tells you some things why you don't want to introduce probiotics that have been active cultures, because an active culture means that it's allowed to keep multiplying forever, right? Well, the heat shock killed probiotics are better because then you know what the genetics are. If you allow something to grow wild and produce, forever, it shared its bacteria, it shared its genetics with things you aren't aware, with things that are in the air, because in yogurt or in capsules, it's all exposed to the air. So, at that point, you don't know what you're sharing with your microbiome. So that's, the best probiotics, if they're not spores, are dead probiotics because those are heat shock killed. So it kind of opens up that whole area of the mythology of what's a good probiotic and what's a bad probiotic, and that there's not been good science to really show why you would want one probiotic over another. Until now, when we have, again, those SHINE studies that show us how probiotics actually work, and that spores are the only ones that actually colonize, and that's why we have the most research going on, because if your probiotic never gets past the gut, how can you do gut studies on a probiotic? So this one was studied at the University of North Texas. We had a human clinical trial, and let's see, let me jump ahead just a little bit. Here it is. It was done by Dr. Brian McFarland. It was published in the World Journal of Gastrointestinal Pathophysiology, and it really gets at the heart of the matter on that leaky gut. It's if you find out how much a spore probiotic can stop that lipopolysaccharide, that's going to be, again, at the root of all chronic illness. So that was the intent of this, and what it showed is, after you consume a high-fat meal, a postprandial production of lipopolysaccharide is very easy to trace. And for people with leaky gut, it's very dramatic. So what they did was they screened all of the college students, and they found the ones that had this leaky gut, and they divided them into two sections. Some were given a placebo and some were given the spores. So this was the spore-treated group, and it showed that it knocked down that lipopolysaccharide by 45%, which was huge. But the other group, I
always seen the McDonald's breakfast.
Was the high-fat meal.
Mm-hmm.
People still eat that stuff.
The placebo group, unfortunately, not only did it continue to produce that lipopolysaccharide, but it continued to get worse. So the net result is it helped reduce it, but it also stopped it from getting worse. So the 60% overall difference in that lipopolysaccharide.
Let me ask you a question. We've been taking megaspores for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
We've been taking 2 a day.
Mm-hmm.
Will these people give them 2 a day?
Yes.
Or can you take more?
You can, but what's important is that total gut, to make sure, to do the prebiotic and to have the full healing of those mucin layers. I think that's an important part of the whole program.
So you just really should stick with 2, I guess.
Yes. That's going to, at some point, you don't get any benefit from just taking more.
Okay.
The one times that we do take more is if there's an overgrowth situation, like a C. diff, Clostridia difficile, or a SIBO, if you've got an actual systemic infection, at that point, there are protocols to crowd out or competitively exclude the pathogen. But when you're talking about just healing, the important time is that 3-month time frame and the titration of the megaspore and the steps to healing the gut.
So would you think that taking activated charcoal, like we're taking, would lessen the effectiveness of this stuff?
It sounds like you're separating it, so it's not, it's taken far enough away from it. It
See,
shouldn't be a problem.
when I was taking this activated charcoal, the original kind of,
Mhm.
just activated charcoal, so away from meals 4 hours, 4 and 4 hours after. It's the kind of
Mhm.
we're doing with this one we got now, which is not supposed to be as harmful as the other.
Yes. I
It's
think
got a lot of stuff in it.
that's a good
Shouldn't hurt.
recommendation. No, I think you're fine.
So 2 a day of this megaspores is good enough, right?
Yes.
We've been doing it for quite a while. Both of us.
Well, when we go the other steps, I'm going to show you why I think those are important too when we
Okay.
get to those. This is just showing the other things that were in the study that each are their own study right now. It helped with appetite control, so there's a weight loss study. It helped with insulin control, so there's a diabetes study. It helped with other inflammatory markers, so there's some autoimmune studies going on. So those are all in process. And then the second step is reinforcing the good keystone strains. So, we can't control everybody's diet completely, and there's certain fibers that feed that Akkermansia, Faecalibacterium, and Bifidobacteria. So that's why they came up with this fiber blend that is shown to specifically feed those keystone strains.
Can I say something about these two? We got these two also. But I couldn't take them because they have citric acid or there's different things in them. The megaspores doesn't have anything harmful.
Yeah.
Both of these,
Both have citric acid?
something in them I couldn't take either of them.
I was the same way. I
Couldn't take 'em.
reacted to them.
We couldn't take them.
Interesting.
And even if we just did a really small amount of them, still had a reaction.
Interesting. Because we've had several people have to start very small. They'll titrate up on this, but they make a huge difference in feeding those
Yeah.
keystone strains.
We
What kind
tried
of
that.
reaction you talking about?
Pardon?
What type of reaction is he saying?
I'm not sure. So what happened was I know a homeopathic doctor up in Arkansas. A year ago in May, I went up and saw her. She's the one that got me on all these enzymes and things, saying I had parasites.
Okay, so this is the company in Belgium, Ghent University, and it's the most sophisticated way to check what's going on in the gut. It's inoculated with a pristine microbiome, one that's never been vaccinated, never had, bad things happen to it. And then you test it by feeding it probiotics. So you can find out what these probiotics do, how they grow, what they produce, and how beneficial they are for healing the gut. And this is a publication we've produced with our spores and the prebiotic. So it says, how much the spores are going to help with fatty acid production and with those keystone strains, and then how much even more the prebiotic will help when you feed them that fiber, like the kiwi skin fiber. And then this is another study we did with the Scheim showing how effective the spores are helping with something like inflammatory bowel disease.
I was told that I have IBS by doctors,
Mm-hmm.
and they prescribed some medicine, which I never took. But on Facebook, I'm kind of on a site of people with IBS and stuff, and they're always talking about that ribofloxacin.
Yes, that's the
Is that a drug?
that they would give you. So this study is showing that Megaspore is more effective than the drug.
Yeah, I don't want to take any drug. This thing.
Exactly.
I took some pain pills, and that messed me up so bad. I mean, I'm so sensitive to drugs anyway, so even pain pills,
Yeah.
try them at all.
They can get a lot of people in trouble.
That's what got me in trouble. I didn't even take that much of it either.
Mm-hmm.
Rapid metabolizer.
Mm-hmm. And then the third step is, again, building that
There.
that layer. Yep. So that's the three
Yeah.
sections there that one of the things that you might look into, one of the major components of that powder is the immunoglobulins, and that is sold separately. It's called IgG 2000, and what those immunoglobulins do is they help bind and neutralize the toxins and help modulate the immune system in the gut.
That they sell this?
Yes.
IgG 2000?
Yes. So it's a standalone product, comes in capsules, and it's the same powder. One of the components that's in that is the powder in this product. So
Yeah.
I would say that would be worth, at least getting part of, since you can't do
No citric acid in it.
Right.
It's just strictly that with a capsule.
Yes.
That's kind of the only thing I can do now. I have to look at every little ingredient. That's why I'm taking another enzyme called Digest Gold. You heard of that?
No.
And they have a Digest Gold, and they have one for wheat, one for gluten. I'm taking, but theirs has no fillers in it. Because a lot of them have rice flour, rice bran, or whatever, all these different things, citric acid or magnesium stearate and all these things.
Exactly. Yeah. We'd have to look on our new enzyme, the label, to see if they've put anything in it. We'll have to look online and see the label for wheat rescue.
IG?
Yes.
Little g, big G. Little g, big G.
Yeah. So what that is, it's
You
got.
have one around?
What's that?
You have one of those around?
No. I don't know what he's. I think he was trying to find a label. But it has IgG, IgM, IgA, and IgD.
Can I ask another question? The IgG, isn't it when you do allergy testing, they always talk, isn't it IgG?
Yes.
That's the same IgG?
Yes, but that's what's in your blood. This is a gut IgG, and it's serum derived, and so it's not going to go systemic. It's not going to go into your blood. It's not going to interfere with your actual IgG, but it's going to soak up. Are you looking for this?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not going to interfere with your serum. It's just going to work in the gut.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. And so this is just showing, I mentioned all the other studies that they've got going. Some preliminary results. It shows that it's reducing acne by 50% and making a difference in all of these, which you would expect if it's truly healing the gut. If it's really doing that side of action where things are escaping into the immune system, then we should expect these things to seem improved. And the preliminary results are that it is. And these are some of the universities and companies. That Royal Holloman University I mentioned, where they get the Spores is there. Mercy, Cleveland.
This seems to what you said earlier, that Europe's way ahead of us.
On some things, definitely.
Cleveland Clinic uses the HU58 for their
Hepatic
encephalopathy.
Yep.
That's their standard treatment.
Yep.
Okay.
Could you scroll back just a second and go back to that?
Sure.
Mega